one day I'm driving in the truck with the nephew, and I go like, everything okay? Like you making ends meet with your money, and sort of explains his sort of money situation to me. And then I've got friends there because I was there for a long time. So I've got Ghanaians that worked with me, didn't work with me anymore. We're still close friends, et cetera, et cetera. And so I remember like asking them for opinions on this. But basically, at the time, the nephew says, I've got to pay 30% or 50% of my salary to my uncle. What the fuck is your uncle doing taking 50% of your money? All right. And we're back in the Crash Labs today with me, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Anthony Vaccaro, and CJ Kim, another legend in the game. So we're back for this is going to be a bit different because Anthony is, an untapped well of knowledge in our office that we should have been including in this podcast from the get-go, I believe. So
I'm an inch deep and a mile wide, Denny. You're the deeper well. Jesus. You and CJ go deeper than I do, but I can go wide. So let's hope I can deliver on that.
CJ can definitely go deep. I think CJ.
I don't know.
All right.
The great depths of CJ Kim.
I'm quicksand. You don't know what you're gonna get. Maybe a one-liner here, like profound one-liner, where I've done my job for the week.
Or get a sued one-liner.
Yeah. Just all of a sudden, quiet CJ throws out something.
Sweet. No, I think this is good. So let's start it off. So, I mean, obviously, Anthony runs the Northern Miner, mining.com, Canadian Mining Journal Empire, and has a good line on all of the news of the day. And obviously, we're cranking out lots of articles and lots of coverage in the space. So it's going to be good for us to have a little bit more structure, a little bit more talking points and things to bat around. And that's the concept here is we can, maybe get, we were doing okay a cappella, but I think it was a little too a cappella.
Too freestyle.
We didn't have enough things to talk about. So
I think you guys are your own harshest critic. I'm just happy to be here. As I told you and CJ, genuinely, for those that know me, know that I try not to be full of shit. I love the podcast. I love Crash Labs. Every episode that I listen to, I always learn something because you guys are going deeper. You have such intimate deal knowledge that you can't really get that anywhere else. You can get the news. Go to the Northern Miner. Go to mining.com. Get the news. That's what I bring. I bring what you already know. But you guys bring something that can't always be reported in the news.
Well, I appreciate it. I think bringing this all together is gonna be a better listen for everybody here. So let's get it started. What do we got to talk about today? What's happening in the world of mining? What gets you excited right now, Anthony? What are you looking at?
I'll tell you. I'll speak selfishly. I'll speak the book to start it, but that'll lead us into good places.
Okay.
The overall trends for us are looking really good. We're seeing site traffic increase.
Yep.
Now, certainly there's more interest in the markets. That's a big part of it. But there's also, we're seeing growing distrust. We know that that younger generation is getting most of their news from social media. But we're also tracking that there's more mistrust, there's more awareness that can't be always just your sole source for news. I think we're seeing that in our numbers. Our membership is growing, so we're actually we're on track to have the best year in terms of membership in like 5 or 6 years. I think we're up like 50% so far in membership revenue year to date. So site traffic's up. Mining.com site traffic's up about 60%. Northern Miner site traffic's up about 60%. And keep in mind, they're both behind a paywall. Mining.com we put behind the paywall last year. So we're seeing a lot of interest. We're seeing a lot of interest from Australian viewers that are looking into our news.
The Aussies down under. The
Aussies have got
koala bears and kangaroos.
They need to go to Northern Miner, mining.com to get their news. So Amazing. we're seeing some really great stuff there. That's the positive trend, right? People are coming for their respecting and they're willing to pay for good independent coverage of our industry. So we know there's not a heck of a lot out there, especially the upstream, especially the exploration. That's where Northern Miner's made its name.
Yeah, and the interesting side of that to me too is that with this whole transition to more independent media, you would think like we're seeing it broadly across the world right now. Like legacy media kind of getting phased out, independent media, podcasters, things like this. We often think of that as like, well, it's good because in its infancy, it seems to be unbiased, it seems to be unbought, right. But as time goes on, it kind of seems like the the taint of, the money side of it manages to come in and sort of sway the opinions of these, various outlets. Like, for instance, you could have a really good podcast, let's say, like this one. I don't know how good it is, but like this one where we don't monetize it. We don't charge anybody anything. It's never like that. We can't be bought, right? But at the same time, there's plenty of good ones that I see sprout up, and then over time you're like, oh, well, they're really diving deep onto this one company. It's like, well, okay, they obviously got paid to do that, and then so the integrity of the whole thing kind of falls apart. And I think these like smaller ones are susceptible to that because it's lucrative. Like,
it's lucrative, but it's not sustaining.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah, the audience knows the difference.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
So so let's just dive into the traffic there for a sec. You brought it up. Do you you've been, how long you're 30 years plus with?
No, not quite. You're making me older than I am. I was a reporter. I started at the Northern Miner in 2005. I was a reporter for 9 years, and I became the head of the group in 10 years, 2015. I became the head of the group. Okay.
And in that time period, I mean, obviously you've seen a bull market come and go. You've seen a few like pop-up events. Is it usually a leading indicator? Do you ever see like traffic numbers spike and users and subscriptions? And obviously it's come in different forms, right? Like now it's very digital, historically paper, whatever. But did you see that sort of?
No, you're absolutely right. And we can go back far. And obviously, for those that don't know, Northern Miner has been the place of record for the industry for over 100 years, founded in 1915 in Cobalt, Ontario. So we have a lot of data that goes far back, and certainly we see these trends with Northern Miner over and over and over, right? So that readership kind of goes up as we're heading into hopefully a secular bull run, which I think we all feel that we are heading into, and those numbers would bear it out. Mining.com goes back to 2008. So 2008, Mining.com was set up as both an online news source, and actually it did have a print component that got shelved after a couple of years. It just became online. So exact same thing there. So, you go back to like 2015, 2016, the teeth of the bear.
Yep.
Those numbers were a lot lower. So Mining.com right now is trending about 800,000 unique users per month. Back in 2014, 15, it was a fraction of that. So 300,000, 250,000.
Who had Mining.com before Glacier?
Infomine.
Infomine.
So Infomine was the late Andy Robertson from SRK.
Yeah.
And he kind of set it up as he wanted it to kind of be an all-serving. So it had the EduMine piece, had the mining intelligence piece, and the Mining.com were kind of a bunch of other things as well. That kind
Career
of got
Mine.
shut down. Career Mine, very big one as well.
Dude,
Absolutely.
that was like where I went for jobs. That was like that was the spot. Career Mine was the I don't know what's the Indeed or whatever, like it was the job board for the mining industry as a geologist, or if you're a mining engineer or a miner, underground miner, driller, anything.
And that's the whole Infomine thing ended up being built off Career Mine. I don't think that was the intention originally, but it ended up becoming the Indeed of mining. And then they had all these names and all this traffic, and then it was okay, let's bolt on more. So it was kind of that Career Mine traffic is what became the initial traffic for the newsletters for Mining.com, for people going into EduMine. So that is, Career Mine really was the success of it in terms of eyeballs.
It's interesting because even as like in the broader employment sector, other websites, more generalist websites came up like Indeed and all these other places, LinkedIn, etc. It's still like somehow Career Mine had a stranglehold on all that, like mining stuff.
Yeah, we're creatures of habit in this mining industry.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. But it's neat to see, like, so like, we were talking in the last episode about sentiment, and I was sort of, I knew a little bit about the answer you're going to give there, but, it's for our listeners, it's helpful to know that, like, when you have visibility on these publications and on this type of information, you can get a smell on things pretty quickly. Like, whether there's an uptick in uranium or an uptick in copper, or one's on the horizon, suddenly people engage with that content much more.
Yes.
They read those articles, they share them more, they sign up for news, they sign up for the site. Let's talk about the conference that you guys recently had in Washington.
Yeah, that's a great place to kind of jump in, because it does. The success of the conference is kind of tied into what the big themes are and what you guys have discussed on Crash Labs with the role of government, right? And that was kind of the unique thing. There's a couple of unique things. We did it as a joint venture with Precious Metal Summit. Great people over there, Jessica Leventhal and Misha Leventhal. We've known and gotten along with each other over many, many years, so it was a natural fit to work together, and the working relationship was excellent. So they handled the one-to-one investor side, and we handled the main stage content side. And we brought on like 30 high-level speakers, a lot of very high-level panel discussions. But, you know, we've all been to a lot of conferences. We've all seen a lot of panels. I think the secret sauce to this one was just the amount of involvement we got. We had White House involvement. We had Department of Energy, Department of Defense, a lot of the big players that are becoming big players in the sector that are really opening up the purse strings and really driving a lot of the growth that we're going to be seeing in this next bull market. We're there and engaging, and not just on the stage, but in the audience. And we were hearing from members of the White House that they were using it to learn a lot. There's a lot of connections made with Ontario government, Quebec government. It was great to just see that kind of unfold. I'm so used to investor conferences where you're used to seeing, you know, hopefully institutional investors talk to issuers and some retail and some high net worth. But seeing the government kind of show up at that level.
Departments, like Department of Defense and White House and stuff.
And lineups of issuers wanting to talk. I mean, not, you know, lineup. Two or three executives wanting to talk to that guy at the Department of Defense and then making time for everything. It was interesting. 5-6 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that was going to be the case. I wouldn't have thought in setting the conference up, I was on a call with... we actually had a guy named Alex Jaquez. He's Joe Biden's economic advisor. So I was on a call with him. He was in the White House. He told me he's right next to the Oval Office. And I thought, what a sign of the times. 5 years ago, the head of the Northern Miner has no chance to be having a virtual call
with anybody
the President of the United States economic advisor as he's sitting next to the Oval Office. It was pretty wild. But he was really engaged and really curious about what we're up to and curious to learn more about the mining sector. Yeah, interesting times. And you guys made that point on the last podcast, which I thought was so salient. Just about when you really look back over history and what drives these things, it's really the government that has the amount of dollars that can really push these kind of paradigm shifts, these big changes that really ripple through our sector. And very often, as you pointed out in the last podcast, there's a metal implication, right? It's a different kind of metal. It's interesting stuff. We had just wrapping it up on that point. We just, the last issue of the Northern Miner, I believe, or the one before it, I get all the columns blended together in my head. I do too much reading these days. But we had one about aluminum. So a lot of the whole thing about the power grid, and we're actually underestimating how much we're going to have to redo the power grid. Of course, those are aluminum wires more than anything else. And that came out of the Second World War because they used to be copper. And it was no, we need those copper. We need the copper for full metal jackets for the bullets, and we need all the military uses of copper. So we need to find something other than copper that can do a pretty decent job of conducting electricity. The government said this.
Right.
So the government funded all the research. They came up with aluminum, and hence now on power grids we have aluminum wires. So there's another one.
That's crazy. And so what's going on in the world of aluminum these days? Are we seeing something like, is that... has there been any sort of news on the aluminum front? I feel like I've heard something.
I mean, you might know better than me. I mean, the thing with aluminum is it's so plentiful, right? Bauxite is everywhere, those big oxidized bauxite deposits. I mean, there's always going to be the political intrigue in West Africa because a lot of bauxite's coming out of Africa, and the Russian influence in West Africa growing. So that's maybe something we can dive into a little bit. But no, I mean, it's like plentiful supply, but it's about the processing and about where those processing facilities need to be near cheap power.
Yeah.
Right? And that was always the big advantage of AAL.L and stuff like that, being in Quebec with all the hydropower.
Right. They're very power intensive because it's all like electrowinning and these big facilities. Yeah. I knew in Ghana, there was like at the top of the Atira range, there's this massive bauxite deposit, which was like a national thing. And then AAL.L and all these companies and the U.S. government and the Ghanaian government and everybody got into this, and they invested huge amounts on this massive hydro dam in the Volta River to do this. And then all of a sudden, a new government came in and just sort of dismantled all of that. They took the power and was like, okay. And then to this day, it hasn't produced a fucking drop of aluminum, but like it was like a mega intergovernmental, international mega thing, and just like that, change of government and unwinds it all, and then it was like 30 years sitting there and never produced and I don't know
What was the rationale behind getting rid of something that probably provided a lot of jobs to the community? And
the stability of the power grids in those countries is obviously a problem, and 70% of the world deals with this issue, right?
Yeah.
Of just unstable power, and you have it for windows throughout the day and things like this. So when you have, I forget what the Volta dam is, but it's something ridiculous, like 1,500, let's get like gigawatts or whatever the fuck it is. It's big, power, and 2/3 of that was earmarked to this aluminum facility or this, process. And then I guess the political talking point at the time was like, well, why would we be doing this when our people don't have power, or paying a fortune for it? And so, the power should go to the people instead of this industry, let's say.
That makes sense.
And so that was the argument. I mean, it's a really reasonably salient one. The problem is that all of these things are in, they're investments, right? They're big. There's governments involved. There's tons of locked up into that. And then once you break a deal like that, then you're like undealable forever. And, international capital investment becomes difficult because you've done this and sanctions and things. And so it got they got locked up into that. But I think the motive was a reasonable one.
Yeah.
Which was like, okay, like we're struggling. We don't have a lot of power. And here's this big honking hydroelectric facility. And that power should go for people, which... Of course, right? It'd be hard to argue that.
Yeah.
Where are you on Africa these days? Because you're, I hope the listeners know. I mean, you began your career, you're an analyst, and you've spent a lot of time in West Africa.
Yeah.
And now and to pull it into this geopolitical conversation, I mean, maybe it's the biggest issue of the day. Does Africa go to the Russian and the Chinese? Will countries stay with the West? I mean, you're a company builder here in Canada with assets mainly in Canada. Is there places you still go in Africa?
Absolutely. I think it's an easy one. I'm attracted to Africa for that purpose because it is central. You've got India, you've got China, you've got Russia, you've got I think people have to remember that the West was early in the game in Africa, right? So the Western world was very early and, sort of, you want to call it colonialism, investing in African society, African civil projects, etc., and laying that groundwork in there, introducing industries, things like that, and working with governments and democracy and establishing, democratic processes throughout the country, helping to stave off corruption, things like that. And I think what you ended up having was this shift, right? So it's like... I hate to say this because I don't know enough about all of this to really talk to it, but I'll call on it because I think it's sort of a parallel example. But if you want to think about like Israel and the UK's involvement in establishing the state of Israel in, historically Palestine, and then like the revolt where they said, okay, thank you very much, UK, but we can take it from here. We don't need you anymore. That happened in much of the French countries and the Ghana and other places. They had their civil movements where they said, okay, we don't need the colonialists anymore. And then you had mining, you had other industries and shared sort of commercial arrangements and stuff like this that outlasted those transition periods. And I'm not going to point to that and say, well, they shouldn't have done that or they were better off before or after. That's semantics. And I think the reality is the Chinese for the last 30 years have been all up and down, investing in Africa, investing in roads, investing in bridges, investing in agricultural projects. They've been throwing money at them left, right, and center. And the West is sort of late to the game. They were early to the game. They walked away from the game. Maybe that would have happened in Ghana with that aluminum thing is an example of why it became kind of, unattractive for the West. That being said, I think that Africa as far as resources are concerned, I think you have a unique place where you have a duality of like exit possibilities. You have the exit to the Chinese companies, and you have the exit potential to the Western companies. And it's kind of one of the only jurisdictions, big jurisdictions, and well-endowed metalliferous kind of environments where that still exists. And so the other thing that I'll point out is that corruption has been getting sorted out to some degree in a lot of African countries. Like what happened in Zimbabwe was unbelievable, right? And the pendulum swung extraordinarily far to one side, where it was completely uninvestable. And now it's slowly coming back. But again, who were the first to get into Zimbabwe? Well, it's the Chinese, you know? So now you can see that, post Mugabe, there's, an environment where you can actually structure a deal, you can actually go and operate, and there's, something to be said about that. I think Africa as a whole is staring down the pipe of money laundering in the metal space as the biggest. I think it's the biggest money laundering center on planet Earth for illicit capital around the world, and using the metals trading game, whether it's gold, whether it's base metals, to hide and launder money. I think that's a big issue. It's a systemic issue. And so that's still not eliminated, but at least they know that. Like the public has become aware of that. And so whether that's going to provoke some sort of change, I'm not sure. But yeah, I do think that by and large, there's a lot of really cool, really good African jurisdictions, and there's a lot of good places to work, and a lot of, potential deposits and discoveries to be made. And, yeah, I mean, I think I like it. I'm not sure how that's going to sit. And then like there's some weird stuff with the Canadian government too, where they're boxing out Canadian companies from selling assets that are in Africa to international, like to the Chinese, for instance, which is bizarre. Like I could understand that in Canada for a Canadian asset, but I don't understand why.
But we're seeing this. That's an emerging trend, right? We saw it with critical minerals and
100%.
And then you leave these companies in the lurch. They can't get that Chinese capital, but then you're not presenting them with an alternative financing or something. I mean, some kind of tax break or something. It's an interesting one. I wonder, if you're an African nation right now, and I should caveat by saying I was looking this up the other day. I think there's now roughly five, where Wagner has military operations on the ground. So I would think those five you probably don't. I think it's it's like Mali,
Burkina
Sudan.
Faso.
I think Burkina Faso, they're there. I don't know if they have official military, but if they're in Mali, they're probably there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think Mozambique was one of them. Anyway, there's five. So I think if Wagner's military is there, that's probably a no-go, though. I would. Even for you?
Yeah, 100%.
It'd
be a no-go for other reasons. Yeah. Like, I think Mozambique is really interesting because, like, let's take gold, for example. The gold endowment in Mozambique is outstanding. Yep. The infrastructure in Mozambique is atrocious. So you can hop in a Unimog and get everywhere, but you have to get everywhere in a Unimog, which is this big, massive all-terrain vehicle that's basically a truck. I'm sure you've seen them before.
I've been in one of those before.
Yeah, and so like a Unimog can get to anywhere, and that's sort of like, that's it. That and like little dirt bikes and stuff, and that's how you'd have to sort of get around in Mozambique. That being said, as far as like, but then the Russians have been there for the last 20 years. Yeah. And so, I mean, and the Chinese. So, Zimbabwe, same thing. Mozambique is like that. There's a few places, and there'd be some places where I would not go for sure. Yeah. But that being said, like Algeria, a lot of these places, like there's pretty much everything.
I think Angola is still very Russian influenced.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. South Africa,
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
But a
South
private
Africa's crazy.
corporation can't compete against an entity backed by a national state-run. Like, there's no way a government would ever nationalize a deposit if the Russians or Chinese are in there. But let's say you're just a Canadian explorer, they can take it away. They don't care.
Yeah, well, again, it's hard, right? Because the idea of overt national interests, it's what we like to think, like, oh, like, the Chinese state clearly has, the People's Republic of China, or we're like the Russians, like, that somehow, like, the Kremlin has an official body that is somehow overseeing things. It's like, it's a couple layers down from that. It's like uber wealthy oligarchs that are, international war criminals, let's say, right? Or arms dealers, or whatever they may be, right? Or Chinese gang leaders, right? They're influenced by the CPP, but they're not official CPP appendages, but they're laundering billions of dollars through a particular, African nation, and then the leadership of that nation is getting kickbacks, and so it's kind of weird. Like, you don't really know. It's almost like an invisible foe.
But all with the awareness by the CPP, right? They're fully aware.
100%. Well, and I'm sure, we can draw tangential lines to say that they're being run by the CPP.
So if you're like, if that's the way a certain type of business is run in a country, and you're a public company, how does it show up in the financials if you have to do a little bit of a kickback? It's like an under.
Well, you can't. I mean, it's hard to compete, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're a public company, you're adhering to international rules. You're adhering to exchange regulations. You're adhering to, if you're a Canadian listed company, for instance, you have to adhere to Canadian standards. And so, I think the reality is like you can't go in.
You can't do that, and you can't even have a free market exit if you're domiciled in Canada. So, it's almost saying it's very, very hard to compete if you're a Canadian company in Africa.
It's hard to compete if you're a public company.
Yeah.
I'd say if you're a public company, you could be a Canadian company, private company, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. You can do a few little things, creative things, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, part of this is the game, right? Like, one of the things I learned when I was over there, which was a sort of a profound thing. So, I don't even know if I should share this, but I will. This is going to sound really bad. We had, like, with the company I was working for, we had a CFO, right? Nice guy, hardworking guy, Ghanaian, right? Good guy. His nephew wanted a job, right? He had paid some money to his nephew to put his nephew through school, right? And so the nephew wanted a job, and he says, well, you need some help. My nephew, I put him through to school for geology. Can he help you? Yeah, I'll hire a nephew, right? Why not? Need extra hands, and it's so-and-so's nephew, and so we'll hire the nephew. So then we hire the nephew, and then, a couple of months goes by, and I see the nephew struggling, like, he's doing a good job, he's working hard, and it was a good hire, like, he's a good kid, right? And, but I noticed he had some sort of money problems, right, so to speak, and I mean, everybody there has, quote-unquote, money problems compared to us, let's say. And so, obviously the cost of living is dramatically lower, and the day rates for these people is dramatically lower than what you would pay a Canadian or something. But that's sort of the nature of the beast. And so, anyway, the nephew's working, and one day I'm driving in the truck with the nephew, and I go, like, everything okay? Like, you making ends meet with your money? And sort of explains his sort of money situation to me. And then I've got friends there because I was there for a long time. So I've got Ghanaians that worked with me, didn't work with me anymore. We're still close friends, et cetera, et cetera. And so I remember, like, asking them for opinions on this. But basically, at the time, the nephew says, I've got to pay 30% or 50% of my salary to my uncle. What the fuck is your uncle doing taking 50% of your money? Well, because he got me the job. And it's like, well, that's a cultural norm.
Wow, uncles are headhunters.
So what you have to understand is So I got real worked up about this, and I got pissed off with the uncle. I was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" You know, and he's like, "Well, what's it to you?" Right? It's like, well, you can't, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it's not morally a wrong thing to do, right? And he's like, no. And then I talked to a whole bunch of my Canadian friends, and they were just like, yeah, that's normal. That's kind of the way things work around here, man. Like, same thing as with the uncles. Like, that's not, you're getting all bent out of shape about this, but that's how it goes. And I'm like, well, fuck. Like, it doesn't make me feel good, right? It's not that I have some moral superiority that I'm trying to go in there and be like, I'm not trying to tell this story to virtue signal about my, whatever. But what I realized was there was like cultural aspects to what we would call corruption that they're perfectly okay with. Mm-hmm. And there is some level of acceptability and some level of like, okay in their society with that.
That's a really important, interesting insight, right? How it's woven into the actual social fabric and the cultural code.
Exactly.
Unless you had that kind of boots on the ground experience, I would never know that.
Right. So you'd be like, what the hell?
Much more difficult to deal with.
100%. Yeah. And so then you're like, okay, well then imagine what that's like on the governmental level. Yeah. Imagine what that's like with people being okay with really what their politicians are doing. And then as Westerners, we're coming in and saying, well, that's wrong. And they're going, if you canvassed 99% of people over there, they'd say, well, that's not
wrong.
The
way it is.
That's the way it is. And you would do the same if it was you. And they would point to, like, they'd be like, you're silly not to, And so then you're like, holy shit. But then you don't have to go that too far back in our own societies to see that, like, back in, both of my parents were families of 9, but that came out of a push at the turn of the century that, if you had 10 kids, you'd basically get cash for life lottery from the government because it was an incentive program to have as many kids as possible, and people were farmers. And so, like, that's, in effect, a form of slave labor. It's like, slavery is abolished or they didn't have it, but they were incentivized to have the maximum number of children, and then they're not paying their children to work them to the bone. And this didn't happen with either of my parents. But at some generation in Canadian history, it was a thing.
But if it's a government program, it's okay. At the time.
At the time.
Retrospectively, we look back and we say, not so okay. But
we go, okay, well, they just had big families back then. But there's like reasons for
There's always economic reasons for almost everything we see. And part of adulthood and part of growing up is you have to pull back the veil and you realize it, right? There's not all these warm and fuzzies behind things. There's economic factors driving everything we see.
100%.
Including art, for Christ's sake. Everything.
Everything, man. Everything. So so as far as Africa goes, it's like I have a sort of a nuanced perspective of that society. And I mean, again, I'm generalizing, right? Because it's not all of Africa that thinks the same way. You have plenty of different countries and plenty of different groups of people there that have dramatically different views and opinions.
Of course. It's the old thing in grade school. You remember the thing in grade school? What's the capital of Africa? People would be stumped. They'd be like, oh, I know this one.
Oh, really?
And it speaks to at least in my grade school. So it spoke to our own ignorance, our own bias, our own prejudice, that we kind of think of Africa as a, monolithic totality when, of course, there's vast differences. At the same time, I've traveled there a lot as a reporter, not as much time as you, but certainly sub-Saharan Africa and Western Africa, certain regions share certain commonalities.
Of course.
The way North America and Western Europe shares certain commonalities, even though Italy and Portugal are very different.
Of course. Like commonalities. Ghana and Nigeria have many cultural similarities, but many dramatic differences. One of the things, the axioms, was that in Nigeria they would kill you with an AK-47, but in Ghana they kill you with bullshit. I know absolutely that I can go to anywhere in Ghana and I can go to the most dangerous place of Accra, let's say, and I could have money hanging out of my pocket and I could walk through that street and no one would touch me. Yeah. No one would do anything.
Yeah. Another perception that
I can't say the same thing about the shittiest part of Toronto.
Yeah, totally. I remember I was in Burkina Faso visiting projects in 2008. Now, since then, of course, there's been some nefarious influences in Burkina. It's gone the wrong way. But at that time, Burkina Faso had a lower crime rate than Sweden.
Wow.
So and Burkina Faso, I think the term actually means like society of noble, upstanding people.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what they took pride in. That it was so safe. No one would ever do anything to you there. It's unfortunate now that it's fallen to some radical groups that are swaying some influence there. But yeah, you can't paint it with a broad brush. One thing I think would be interesting to dive into a little bit within this context is, it does seem to me, though, that the smart way to play this current time is to play both sides. I mean, if you don't have Wagner military inside of your country and you're able to play both, I mean, why wouldn't you? I think of like Indonesia secured, I think, $20 billion from the G7 because they're afraid of it just going completely to China. And it was in the guise of carbon reduction, but really it was about trying to secure some nickel supply, I think. So $20 billion, right? That's nice. And yet, if push came to shove, where do we all think, if there was some dramatic global event, where would Indonesia's nickel go if it had to be one or the other? China or the West?
China.
100%.
Unequivocally.
You agree?
Yeah.
But they got $20 billion out of the West. Kazakhstan, right? There's still money going into Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's still trying to play both sides. But again, push comes to shove. Where's everything in Kazakhstan going to go?
Russia.
It's not coming to West. Yeah, it's going to Russia.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I think it bifurcates the supply and the supply side economics of all these different commodities, let's say, specifically the commodities.
Yes.
The precious metals, I think, translate better.
Yep.
I think it'd be very odd to have a stark duality in like price environment and, pricing period of in the precious metals universe. But as far as the base metals and the industrial minerals go, 100%. I could totally imagine a future where if we keep going down this east versus west polarized situation, that you get a different nickel price in the east versus the west. And,
I think so too.
You probably just won't see pricing out of the east, eh? Like, why does it matter? It's not a commodity that's going to be readily traded anyways. I imagine that's why you have all these government officials coming to a conference just to learn more about what the explorers are doing. But
bingo.
I think if they want to have more secure domestic supply, it would be to make things easier to explore versus having a politician trying to divert money from the public and them trying to pick which juniors to fund. Like, they don't know.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, all this chat makes me think about what's going on in Mexico right now.
What do you think of Scheinbaum? Better or worse than Obrador?
Look, I think there was 26 presidential candidates assassinated in this election.
I didn't see that stat. Wow.
Is it 26?
Wow. I believe. I'm not doubting you.
Can we look that up?
Holy.
I think it's like 26 or 27 presidential fucking candidates were offed in the run up to this election.
Then who would want to run? That's crazy.
Well, let's think about that, man. That's in Mexico. And we're talking about open pit mining bans.
Why would that be included in her platform then? Open pit mining.
I don't know.
Well, Obrador did have, he was still popular, right? I think I saw some stat. He did have some level of popularity. So I think she's just following along. That's kind of the signaling that I understand from my reading of it.
Do you think it passes?
Well, I think it's a bunch of bullshit, obviously. But I think in terms of getting her to power, she didn't want to upset. I think the feeling was that Obrador had the formula to win, and why mess with it? Now, when she gets into power,
what happens?
The question is, could she be any worse? Because Obrador's pretty damn bad. So hopefully not.
Yeah, I mean, look,
I feel like that's how a lot of countries are winning. Like, look at choose a country right now. It feels like could be worse, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
This is the biggest challenge of our times.
Yeah.
The idea was the best people in your society would want to run for head of office. Would anyone want to run for head of, who are you attracting? Outside of the 37 assassinations, just the metaphorical assassinations that you take on social media, the fact that you have zero life. It's very hard to attract the best and the brightest into politics right now. So this is...
Look how hard the West in EU right now, look how hard it's swinging the other side right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a big shift, right?
It's whacked because, yeah, you're right. Who would want to run for that? Who would want that? And then who doesn't have, like, I mean, everyone has some sort of skeleton that if you dig deep enough, there's something about them, something that they do, something that, something that they've done or whatever that you could shine a light on and expose and deplatform said person if you really wanted to.
Yep.
I think one of the interesting perspectives that I heard recently was that if you think this through, there's a class of uber wealthy people in every country, let's say. To what level would those people put the fate of their businesses, of their family wealth, of their dynasties, of whatever it is, right? To what level would they put that in the hands of Bob the baker that decides he's going to run as an MP, or Judy the fucking librarian that's deciding that public office is her calling? Like, to what level are these people going to be unbought, untainted? There's no universe where I can imagine that being a true thing.
Yeah.
Like,
no, you're right. You're right. George Wills, the great conservative columnist from the States, he once had that line was along the lines of, it's not a question of when you're choosing your leaders as to whether they're going to be the elite or not the elite. It's which elites. The Kennedys, while they're Democrats, were elites. FDR, the Roosevelts were elites. It's not just like, oh, it's only on the right that they're elites. No, it's which elites do you want to rule was his point. I think increasingly, though, even elites are like, I don't need this. I got my wealth.
100%. Yeah. Right? But so now you're looking at, okay, but there's other people now that are coming up through it. And, in the case of Mexico, 36 of them were offed. And, this lady comes in and it's like, great, who's behind that? Who paid so that she didn't get offed? Yeah. Who's driving that?
Totally
right.
Whose hands did she shake to get to the position where
100%. And for every publicly traded Canadian silver miner or miner in, Mexico, whether it's copper, silver, pick your poison, there's probably 100 private, dynasty mining families in, Mexico that, are not afraid of a little bribe money here, a little donation money there, a little more interference, let's say.
Yes.
Right? And so, I don't know. Like, Jesus. And how big is that how much does that matter for Mexico? I don't understand Mexico enough.
Yeah.
It's actually scary.
Well, some countries in South America, you can really see who the families that run it. Like when we're in Peru, who runs Peru? Like Peru.
Yeah, we got to see all the people that run Peru.
Yeah.
Like that whole thing, that's a very small pack. And it's like...
And you can tell if they're actually European or if they're South American. They literally look like Europeans, but they all spoke Spanish, right?
Yep.
And that was those were the controlling families that...
Yeah, there's a dynasty class in Peru that runs the shit. And same with Chile. And same with... I think what's interesting... I'm interested to see what happens with this Javier down in Argentina.
Malay, yeah.
And like I recently across the desk came some oil and gas stuff, I think it was, for like the entire southern, maybe it was Samson brought, I forget, maybe I think Samson brought it. It was like the entire south, end of Argentina was like, yep, up for grabs. So I think he's just cutting.
Well, before, especially in oil and gas, it was like a no-go because they nationalized everything at one point.
Right.
Everyone was so scared to go down there.
Economically, he's made some positive strides, right? So Rob McEwen was at our conference in D.C., so I sat down with Rob, and I did pre-interviews with him before, and I'm friendly with Rob over the years. Good guy. He's very, very bullish. And I would say that I've known Rob long enough now that I remember, and I mentioned it to him, I remember when Macron was elected in Argentina. It was, 2 presidents before, business-friendly. And I remember at that time saying to Rob, is this good news? He's like, these things, they're cycles, and is he going to be in power long enough? He didn't have a good feeling that he would be there long enough, and he was right, he wasn't there long enough. But with Milei, he's confident. He's confident that he's going to do the right things. He thinks he's going to be there long enough to actually have an impact, but Lord knows, right? You need time.
I think you can have a
problem.
It's odd because if you're implementing what he's implementing, it's a burn it down strategy. As far as de-bloating the government, like it's the first time we've seen. I think
We could use a bit of that in Canada, couldn't we?
a libertarian, right? I think it's the first time it may be that we've actually seen a libertarian. And I'm sure somebody listening will point me to a place where I'm wrong, but as far as I can remember, or I'm aware of, and I'm not a historian, it's the first time we've got a pure libertarian in charge of a country.
I can't think of one.
Doing libertarian type things.
And actually following through.
Going like Department of Education.
He started with the FX too and the currency. Right?
Yeah, like social whatever, gone. And he's just like scratching all this stuff and he's just like, flattening all this stuff out, which is like, okay, good. He's de-bloating things. And so to your point, I mean, do you need 4 years? Do you need longer term to do that? Like once you do that and you lay all these people off, all these government departments, and you cut all this fat and you do all that stuff.
That part you don't need 4 years.
You don't need 4 years.
You need 4 years to make sure that a mining company, though, can trust its permits and start to build and that side of things. Right?
It's like Doug Casey always wanted to buy a country and put it on an exchange, be a public company, and you know that it would be run the most efficiently because the ultimate goal is to create value, right? So
that would be an experiment. My goodness.
Just buy a small country.
I imagine there'd
and
be some unintended consequences where things might go terribly wrong, but who knows?
Probably
some fast money schemes.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I'm not sure what this means. I've got some investments in Mexico. I'm holding them.
Okay.
So
there is a flicker of optimism.
Yeah, there's optimism there. I mean, I'm holding them. I think their optionality. I bought a little bit more. I'm kind of breaking a golden rule of mine, which is if something's political, don't play. Oil, very political.
Yes.
Never liked oil. Don't play oil. Yeah. It's a fucking political thing. And I can't understand that. You know what I mean? Like fundamentally, if it was just very like unpolitical, fine. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting though. But to your earlier point with the conference and other things, it seems like all these metals, all these resources are getting politicized.
They are, and to go back to your opening question about what's kind of trending, I mean, the stories that people are reading the most on mining.com and Northern Miner are around either specifics about a specific commodity, uranium, copper, gold, obviously the big three right now, but anything around geopolitics, right? Anything that's going on, whether it's Daniel Noboa in Ecuador, or Gustavo Petro in Colombia, Boric in Chile. Whenever there's an announcement or something going on, those are always our top stories. So, and again, that's kind of new, right? That wasn't the case 5 or 10 years ago. There is this, awareness that these are the stories that are going to be driving our sector, as you're pointing to, on the supply side, because really this is about supply.
That's what it is.
And where it's going to
I wonder how long it takes for local news to make international news, because people on the boots on the ground can react to the news faster.
Right.
I imagine there's a little bit of an arb. Like if something happens, boots on the ground, you can make a trade on it before it hits 100%. The international
When
stage,
I was a
right?
reporter, that was one of my things. I used to try to go and get those Spanish boots on the ground, small news. I kind of knew them all for the different countries. Actually, a quick little anecdote, kind of funny. It's a good friend of mine now, Andrew Cheadle, former head of the PDAC. He ran a company in Dominican Republic.
Yep.
And before I knew Andrew, I was doing this. So I found some local news source in the Dominican Republic. And there was something that came out. They were the first ones to report that they were like halting all exports of precious metals. There was going to be some crazy tariff. And it wasn't widely known, but it wasn't this small thing. So I found that. I put out a story on it. Killed his stock. And he was just going to raise money, and he was like, who is this Anthony Vaccaro guy? And then, we ended up, mining industry being it is, we ended up being friends. But it was totally that.
Because people do it
Did you go on that site trip maybe around that time? I was there.
I didn't go to Andrews. No, I didn't meet him. I went down to Dominican Republic as a reporter with Bill Fisher. Was
Gold Quest.
Gold Quest.
I did the Gold Quest trip, and then I did Andrews. I did both of them.
I think John Cumming did that one.
It was awesome.
It was good, right?
It was cool. It was cool to see the entire country of Dominican Republic.
Wasn't Andrews closer to the Haitian border, or do I have
He
that
was right
wrong?
up in the mountains. Yeah, he was closer to the Haitian border up in the mountains, and Andrews was, and then Bill's was further down, with Gold Quest. But it was super cool to see Dominican Republic from the inside. You know, not as a tourist, not as a beachgoer, not as a all-inclusive resorter. Just to sort of see like what's this country like, and surprisingly far more wealthy and like Western, I'd say.
I came away impressed as well, and I loved the real Dominican Republic as opposed to the
100%. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. I went there with my family a couple years ago with the kids, and because there's some nice like kids all-inclusives and stuff, and then everyone was terrified of like leaving the resort, and I'm like, no, we just got to get past couple kilometers from the halo around the resorts and you're good.
Yes.
And we did that and they like loved it. So every night we were going out to the, you know, to the inside, let's say, and it was like there's better restaurants, anyway. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a nice place.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the old colonial part of the city of Santo Domingo. Is absolutely gorgeous.
Super
down
cool.
By the water, yeah.
Music and everything. It's a really beautiful city. Yeah. Where were we going with that? So we got. I interrupted you. You were talking about.
Well, no, CJ was making that good point that there is an arb there.
Yeah,
there absolutely is.
Well, like you look at even with satellite imagery, the strike. Like people prepare for strikes. It's not like all of a sudden everyone packs up and leaves. They're parking trucks and stuff like that, and they're getting ready for it. And then a company will announce. But there's like a good maybe a week lead time up to it, and a lot of funds now are utilizing satellite imagery to see what's happening on mine sites, especially if one mine accounts for 60-70% of a company's production and they trade on it. So,
well, this is where IKN was. He had that's what he was, right? Mm-hmm. Wasn't he? He was like the canary in the South America.
Yeah, he had a great pulse on geopolitics in the South, and people appreciated
that was his bait in his.
I guess before he learned that poo-pooing people gave you more traffic, I guess, right?
I mean, look at it. He did a great job in garnering an audience, and he slung mud around, and a lot of it deserved, I think. And he points out stuff, and he's still got a following. Certainly don't agree on everything that he has to say, but you know, it's a thing. But that was his inception story, right? Was South American.
I think so.
On the ground politics. He was one of these guys.
And saying the things that couldn't be said in traditional media because we'd get our asses sued off. Right. He was able to say stuff and hide in the jungles of Ecuador or wherever exactly he was. We didn't know it. It became more known who he was and where he was. But in the early days,
it was anonymous.
That was not well known at all.
Right. He was a mystery.
Yeah. You had to read it, and you had to find out about what two analysts got in a fist fight in the hallways. It was everything there, right? Yeah. It was absolutely wild. But it's there's certain things there that he has said that are not
true.
Facts,
yeah, but
it's going to be when you're in that game, and that's your MO is to it's like the Emperor and fucking Gladiator, frothing at like the crowd wants blood, they want gore, they want and so you're like, if that's what you're selling, then you got to keep selling it, right? So they got to give them juicy shit to hang on to, and then eventually it's not long before that must be a tough part about journalism, right? Is like you got to make sure your facts are accurate before you report something, otherwise you can get sued.
Oh yeah, and even listen, that's a big part of what we do in professional journalism. Hire professional journalists that are trained, that know how to fact check, and you do your best, right? No one thinks that there's an objective truth that you're ever going to attain, but you strive towards it. That's at least your North Star. But we've certainly had instances in the past where we did our due diligence on a story, a negative story about a particular company, and we thought we were covered, and then we ended up getting sued because we said they didn't disclose something, and then sure enough, there's a technical report 15 years previous, and there's that one line buried on page 67 that did disclose it. So you do have to, especially in this industry, right, a very technical industry, you have to be very, very careful, and it's a lot of work. I'm happy that I think the current roster of reporters that we have now is extremely strong. They're good at walking that fine line of holding the industry to account. But touch wood, we haven't been sued in a while, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
It's a lot easier to take someone off a stock than to get someone to buy it. So maybe that's why a lot of people are so testy about it. But
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy because even in this office, we just chat, water cooler chat, and stories pop up or hypothetical situations pop up, and like, oh, that sounds juicy, but it's impossible to fact check, and if you can't, then you can't publish it, you can't say it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of shit like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've
is.
seen some juicy ones fly by.
Yeah,
And you're
you
like,
certainly
"Whoa."
hear things, and you certainly try to get. Listen, our reporters, you go in, you become a journalist because you're driven to try to find that story, right? So if there's something juicy going on, the reporters will try to see if they can get someone to go on the record, if they can do it in a professional way. But it's certainly difficult. It's not easy, and where we can, we do. The most recent one, of course, being Red Pine Exploration. I think we did a good job. It's on the cover of the June edition of the Northern Miner. Colin McClelland did a great job covering that. I think that's a good example of how you hold people to account, but you do it in a way that's still fair to all sides as much as possible.
Yeah, you got to be careful not to because there's so much out there that, and we talked about it. It's been a topic on a couple of podcasts, but we got to be careful about jumping to conclusions without having a full picture. I think with the uranium supply chain, one of the interesting things with that will be if you take an asset like NextGen, or you look at some of these bigger assets out there, you go, fuck, like if you're, and you look at the sheer amount of like uranium these things can produce, it's like if you're an energy company, if you're in the business of building nuclear power plants and taking offtakes, don't you want to diversify your supply chain a bit? Like, do you really want all your marbles in like one mega asset?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing too. Like there has to be diversity in where all this uranium comes from, even if it's all domestic.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great. And just for the viewers to set up the context, Danny and I were talking, I don't know if it was recording or not, but around this idea that, so a couple of things. Kazakhstan, what came out of our DC experience as well, was that from 3 top uranium heads of companies, in 2028, Kazakhstan pretty much is going to be going to the Chinese. That's when a lot of the current deals roll over, and there's a consensus that as of that date, and that's the biggest supply of U3O8 in the world, that's coming off the market. The good news is, well, if you're a uranium investor, hold on to 2028. That should do well on the price. But in terms of securing Western supply, the good news is there's also consensus that North America has all the uranium that we need to fuel our reactors. It's just more about getting to them. And then hence, Denny, your point about needing to diversify and not just rely on.
Like if NextGen gets
MacArthur
built,
River.
it's like, or MacArthur River or whatever, like, upsizes its, or there's a whole bunch of, different fronts that are happening right now. But yeah, it's an interesting point, right? Yeah. That it's like, yeah, well, you're not going to get it all from one spot, right? Like, there's got to be risk in that,
Mm-hmm.
you'd think. Anyway, I don't know. I think all of it's it's a very unique space. Anyway, let's put a bookmark in that one. We had another one we wanted to talk about, Anthony. What was that?
From the headlines, we'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch upon Anglo and BHP, and then the news that we had, a trending story that came out yesterday was on the Botswana government. So, of course, the context here being that to kind of thwart the BHP push to acquire Anglo, selling off some of the assets that haven't performed as well. Notably, since, looking at the chart, Anglo was fine when Mark Cutifani was running it. The second he left, it's been and became very vulnerable. But they are where they are. So now De Beers is going to get ejected, but the government of Botswana is going to increase its investment in De Beers and its investment thesis for it. Sorry for pardon the chuckle, because maybe they know more than I'm sure they know more than I do. But it's cyclical. The problems with diamonds right now is just cyclical, and it's going to come back.
A cyclical problem?
Yeah, I don't feel that the problem with diamonds is cyclical.
Lab-grown diamonds have cut them literally
Exactly.
70%.
I think
not
it's a fucking
cyclical.
typewriter. I think it's dead.
Same
I think
here.
it's like.
So we have a consensus.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it's over. I heard that De Beers is going to go for. It would make sense too for Botswana. I heard that De Beers is going to go for like retail stores.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's the next big thing.
Yeah, like to compete with like Tiffany's and stuff. They're going to have their own retail.
It feels like
division.
they're flailing, which happens late in a, as you're declining, you start grabbing. I mean, because they tried the lab grown. I remember we did a little diamond conference in Toronto, like 2017, 18, and there was participation there. And that was when their whole thesis was, we're going to do the lab growns because we believe there's two markets. One is the lab grown, and they actually undercut the market. They came in cheaper than the lab grown, and then they were going to, and that was going to help preserve the gap between the actual mine diamonds, which were the premium. And 6, 7 short years later, they're like, no, we're abandoning the lab grown because it's killing our business.
Like
mistake.
lab grown is way cheaper, and they're bigger, they're clearer, they're nicer, they're better, they're.
Why wouldn't you buy a better product that's 70% cheaper? It's
like
Simple as
it's
that.
unbelievable. Like you can get multiple carats for like under $10,000. Like
that market's done.
it's insane. Why would you just for what? A certificate that says it came from fucking Earth? Like you really got to sell that. You really got to sell that narrative. And like who cares?
Well, if anyone can market diamonds, they're the ones that created it.
Historically, they were, almost like Apple, almost more of a marketing company than anything else, right? De Beers was amazing at that. I mean, I do wonder, even if this holds, it's still super niche, which is if you're the recipient of a wedding band or an engagement ring, do you still not want it to be the most premium one possible?
I don't
Do you
think
feel
anyone,
that your partner, do you don't think that?
I
I'm older. You guys are younger. You got your finger more on the pulse
no,
of that.
no
I
one's
mean,
gonna
I
ask
think-
you where it came from. It's like
no one's gonna ask to see your certificate.
yeah.
If you're wearing it, like let's say your wife is wearing a diamond ring or an engagement ring or something, and you put out big money. You can put out a fraction of that money and get her a bigger one, which is going to win points for daddy here.
Yeah.
And then number 2, it's like no one's gonna ask her, "Can I see your certificate?"
Yeah.
Like on the street, like what are you gonna do? Wear your fucking certificate around your neck and a little like lanyard, like it's to show that the rock you got on your finger. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
So
to
come
me.
clean. If you're getting engaged to a woman, just come clean, because that's the only point where this breaks down. Does the woman want to see the certificate?
I don't think
Because
so.
she wants a real diamond. Is that going to be a sustainable
There's no
thing?
way. I think there's no way over time. Over time,
You think it's gone?
I think it's phasing out.
Because
I think
they're the
it's
ones that created that as well, didn't they? Didn't De Beers create the
synth.
Yeah.
well, I don't know if
they created.
They bought it or whatever. They
like the proposing with a diamond.
Absolutely, they created that, and
Yeah.
they spent tons of money in Hollywood
Yeah.
to make movies.
So
Propagate
really?
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
they
Oppenheimers.
did
Yeah,
it.
they were
Yeah.
shrewd.
So maybe
Wow,
their
I didn't
new
know that.
thing is maybe try do some sort of marketing campaign where it has to be dug up from some third world country, slave labor, like it's worth more.
I mean,
Otherwise,
the only
he doesn't really love you.
yeah, it's got to be a foggy, shitty colored stone.
Yeah.
And that's the only one like an industrial diamond. I mean, there's
And we
always
got-
going to be a case for it, right? Like you still need diamonds on the industrial. I did produce diamonds a little. Like I know it like
industrial
from like a
dime a dozen too now, like on the
it
industrial
was
level.
like $20
I
or
think
$30
it's
a
good.
carat.
Like
It was
no, I don't
fuck
think
all.
people coming in and like having to spend X amount months and going into your marriage in debt. It's like I think it's done.
Well,
It doesn't-
sandpapers and drill bits. Like there'll always be a market for the industrial case for diamonds. Like there'll always be an industrial demand for diamonds. But that's just there's a huge gap between that and like these bigger stones for materialistic sort of that side of it.
But they
right?
can't
The
create
luxury market.
colored diamonds yet, right?
No. So colored is still colored diamonds is like there's gases like boron and some other things, like there's gases in the diamonds that give them their color, right? It's a chemistry thing, and I don't think on the synthetic process they can do that right now. Stand to be corrected, but I think that's the impasse. And so there may still be that, but that's fringy. Like I honestly, no. I think people want a nice big shiny diamond, and the synthetic ones are better at that, and they're real. Like Like, that's the oddity. A synthetic diamond is no less of a real diamond than a...
On the molecular level.
It's a diamond.
Diamond, yeah.
It's like if tomorrow they came up with synthetic gold, you'd really give a fuck if it was a gold ring or a synthetic gold, like a lab-grown gold versus gold.
You're
like,
not eating it. Synthetic meat is going to have a little bit
Right.
more of an uphill battle because you're actually ingesting it. But if you're
Sure.
not ingesting it, I agree. I don't think
Yeah.
But if it was
like,
the same
you know,
on a
it's-
molecular level,
the meat.
yeah.
I think there's a bigger psychological hurdle, though. I do. Even if you can prove to people scientifically that it's the same, there's still
It's just
something
carbon.
about
It's just
ingesting.
carbon. Like they're both carbon.
We're talking about meat.
No, I know, but I'm just saying in the case of
Yeah.
you know, this is just like carbon. At least meat's like, you know, there's proteins and there's all this shit.
It's more complex.
Yeah, it's more complex. Like, you know, synthetically growing, you gotta grow that, right? Like a different way. Like this is just like, this is literally the same thing.
So all stones in the future will be replicatable. Could be lab grown. Emeralds,
All gems.
all gems.
Is that you're the guy to ask that? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, hypothetically, yeah, at some point, but you know, diamonds is just pure carbon, so it's like the easiest one. Like I don't know, like you know, like sapphire is corundum, right? Which is a more complicated crystal structure in many ways, and it's got other chemicals in it, and so are rubies and things, and then you've got all your, you know, your amethysts, and you've got all your different things, right? But
So those would,
you know, those hypothetically may be, you know, you could probably grow them in a lab. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Relatively, how much easier or harder it is to do that.
If they're having a problem with colored diamonds, presumably
It's probably
it'd
challenging
be
to have more complex
difficult with
things. Like
sapphires, rubies, topaz.
diamonds, just pure carbon and pressure and temperature, and you're going to get a diamond, right? Like if you have the right, if you mimic those environments, and then you can slow down that growth for that crystal structure so that it can, you know, it can, you know, do it at, and you get like, I mean, obviously they figured it out. So, I mean, at some point, can they do it with other things? Probably. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think De Beers is got to pivot, or they're going to just dominate this lab-grown diamond space, and that'll be it. The
But
diamonds
then they'd have to
forever.
do another U-turn because as of right now, they're out of that light box, they call it, right? So as of now, they're like, we're not doing light box anymore.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
they're so they backed out totally. Of
So they
the
originally said
synthetics.
we're in synthetics, and now they've said we're out of synthetics.
Oh, I thought they were like dominating synthetics though.
No, because they originally undercut the market. Now they've been undercut again. So now they're saying we're out.
Oh, got it. Okay.
But it might be the death knell.
That
But
might
to
be
bring it back, Anglo, does BHP get Anglo? What's everyone's gut? Tell them on this. So we're at what? We're at the third offer now? 49 billion, I think was the last.
Yeah.
probably.
You think they do?
Yeah.
Because who else comes in? Right? Wouldn't another player, wouldn't Rio already come in if they're going to come in?
Yeah. I don't think Rio. I think Rio's got other focal points. I think BHP and Anglo, where their overlapping points are, is the right
Makes
mix.
sense. Yeah.
I don't see that with the diversity of composition of like where their revenue comes from, jurisdictionally, etc. All these sorts of things. I see that as more of a natural combination.
So then good on Anglo for driving up the price.
Yeah, do I think it actually happens? I'm gonna say yes.
CJ?
I think it happens now.
Yeah.
Like I don't see.
I do too.
Like-
It's hard to put the
One.
genie back in the bottle, right?
Yeah,
It was like the tech thing with the
Glenn.
Glencore deal
Yeah.
and like the met coal stuff and like pushing that
Something
out.
happened. Although remember with Barrick and Newmont, it didn't happen. They landed on the joint venture.
True.
Nevada Gold Mines.
True.
That's the only one that's top of mind where it was out there and then didn't happen.
Yeah.
And different. That was.
But
a
I feel
merger
like
of
he did
equals.
that just to do that part of it as well. It felt like that was like the underlying motive of why he wanted
That he always wanted to get to
Yeah.
the Nevada Gold Mines
Yeah.
JV and control it, which he does. Yeah.
It's interesting because on the same vein, I was thinking about like Newmont and they're dropping of the Canadian. This is an old story now, but they were dropping all their Canadian, all these they're dropping like Eleanor and Musselwhite and yada yada yada, all these assets, right? And some of them still have quite a bit of mine life left on them. Some of them, whatever. They probably did that calculus at $1,600 or $1,700 gold. Gold goes to $2,400. I'm sure some things have maybe changed.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But they can't change because they've already expressed that these things are dogs and that they want off of them. They've already expressed that, they're worth X, Y, or Z. They've been shopping that around. So the reality is, I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle.
Can they, you know this better than I would ever know it, can they just keep raising their price? I mean, they could, right? They could say now that a higher gold price, discounted back, value's higher.
I mean, that's the odd part, right? Because that's the parallel I'm sort of drawing with this whole Anglo BHP thing. Is like when you sort of set out with a price like that, you affix it to that there is a price at which this could all be sold, and there is a limit to things. It's like, well, you sort of got to go through with it, I think. I don't know to what extent you can say, forget about it, and we're just going to continue.
I don't know what they said publicly. I know that they wanted to sell non-core assets, and that's where Eleanor and Musselwhite come out. But they also said enough where they kind of poo-pooed the assets. And it's like, why would you want to buy it if it's not good enough for
totally. Their messaging on that was surprising to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's what prevents them from being able to say,
exactly.
You know what?
Going to what you said.
Yeah.
Like if it's out, it's out. And I don't know, if you want to get off of something at a good price, it may not be the best sales tactic to say that these are, B tier assets and we want them off of our book, like out of our portfolio.
Yeah, if somebody's listening out there, you want to be Ian Telfer 2.0 and have Goldcorp of the next cycle, go out there and buy all those fucking assets right now. Mm-hmm. And put them all, glue those things all together.
Yeah.
And you probably do okay. Or at least I'm sure some of them, and boom, you've got a thing.
Yeah.
Away you go.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about political risk.
Yeah. And then go buy a couple of other more meaningful other things, and you bootstrap that with the cash flow from these things. And you're in a new gold environment. And
it's probably not enough to replenish the 1 million+ ounces that they need a year, right? Like, why waste around on a couple of 100,000 ounces? It'd be awesome for a mid-tier.
Yep.
For the largest gold producer in the world.
Yep. No, you could certainly toot a warp whistle to a Goldcorp of the next one.
Mm-hmm.
There you go, young mining engineers, entrepreneurs. Little masterclass from Denis Laviolette.
Don't get your masterclass
Do a
here,
wrap
but
up.
it's an idea. Dig into the data room and see if it's possible. Okay, well, I mean, guys, thank you very much. Anthony, thank you so much for today.
This was a lot of fun.
We had a good chat today, so yeah, perfect. No other stories, no other things to touch on? I think we're good.
You guys are great conversationalists.
We covered a lot of ground.
Yep. All right.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next week.
Awesome.
Cheers.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.